Right, welcome to Maths Learning Centre seminar on doing the exam well. Be particularly useful for people doing a maths exam, but anything that's mathematical like physics or economics will apply equally well. And the first thing to say is that's the contact details of the Maths Learning Centre, and we've got a web address, Facebook, email, phone number, and if you want to drop in person, and we're open 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. on weekdays, all the way until the end of exams. Okay, so you don't have to worry about us not being open in SWAT week. We are open in SWAT week, except of course we're not open on a public holiday. So 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. weekdays, just drop in. If when you drop in, it'd be a good idea to have a look around to see if anyone's studying the same course as you. And if not, write your name on, not your name, write your course on the little sign so that other people can study with you. It'll work way better during SWAT week if everyone doing the same course is sitting together. You're right here, Nicholas? Right. I'm David.
And I'm Nicholas, and together we are the Maths Learning Centre. Thank you very much.
So, moving on. So, this seminar's about doing exams well. I'm going to start with talking about what exams are for. So, from the lecturer's perspective, the purpose of an exam is for you to show what you understand by getting you to solve problems. Now, they need to try and figure out if you've understood the things in the course, and the way that they do that is to give you problems to solve, and then they read the way you've solved the problem, and that is how they assess whether you understand. So therefore, you have to understand, because you can't show what you understand if you don't understand. So that's the first thing to know about preparing for exams. You have to understand. And secondly, you have to practice solving problems. Okay? So that is really the thrust of the talk. If you leave now, that's the overall message. You need to understand and you have to practice solving problems. But we will have a whole lot of useful tips for exams at Adelaide Uni as well as we go along. So what we're going to do is we're going to split this into time zones. We have before the exam, we have during the exam, we have after the exam as well. And we're going to get closer and closer to the exam as we move along. This red arrow along the bottom, sometimes along the top, will be time moving forwards. So before the exam, we need to study. And this is our advice for how to go about studying. It's a cycle. You need to make sure you understand. You need to practice solving problems. And you need to get some help. And then after you've done that, you can go back to the beginning and say, well, what do I understand now? And now I'll practice some more problems, and then I'll get some more help, and so on. And we have advice about those in particular.
Yep, let's go.
So, here's some things we want you to do. You need to, some advice about remembering things, because memory is the first step to understanding. Yeah,
I was going to say. Yes.
And some advice about summarising notes and organising ideas, and some advice about how to ask yourself questions to understand more.
All right. So going back to what we actually said at the start, we said we need to understand, we need to show we understand. And the part of the understanding is being able to state things like your definitions, your theorems, that bit. And things to remember. So particularly for maths courses, we treat understanding as being able to tell me what definitions are and how to relate those definitions with theorems to other things that we've already seen. So you need to remember definitions, theorems, formula, procedures.
These are all things you need to remember. And unlike school, many maths courses at university, such as Maths 1M and Maths 1A, do not allow you to have a cheat sheet. Okay? So a course like Introduction to Financial Maths will allow you to have a cheat sheet. So some courses do, some courses don't. If you have only learned to study for exams with a cheat sheet before, you're going to have to change the way you study. You're going to have to learn to remember things.
So we would actually encourage you to still make that cheat sheet, because that's a good process to go through. It helps you order your thinking. You just have to know that the information on that cheat sheet needs to be remembered, rather than you have the sheet to remind you in the exam. But those who've made cheat sheets, you probably realise you didn't actually use it very much in the exam. It was the process of making it that was most useful.
Okay, so this is the list of things that you need to try and remember. And part A of most maths exam questions will ask you for a definition or the statement of a theorem. So you just need to know it by heart so that you can put it down. Okay, you can change the grammar of the words slightly if it feels better to you, but in general, just having exactly what the lecturer said is precisely what they want. This is not English, this is maths. Your own words is irrelevant, you need to use the words that you were given, okay?
Yep.
So, now some advice on how to remember. The first thing you can do to learn to remember is to try to remember, okay? You should sit down without your notes and attempt to remember everything. Write down as much as you can.
So what I used to do is I'd have a sheet of paper with the things that I would try and remember on it, and then I would get up each morning and I would try and write out this sheet of paper again and see which bits I could remember and which bits I didn't remember. So I at least had some idea about what I could remember.
And practicing things and just seeing how good a job you've done, even if you make no effort whatsoever to get better at the thing that you're practicing, you will get better. So if you want to get good at guessing how much your shopping adds up to, when you get to the end, don't make any effort to actually add it up. Just guess and say, oh, I was pretty close, or I was pretty far. And just doing that, just guessing and comparing will make you better at guessing, even if you have no idea how it's being done. Same works with remembering. Try to remember and then compare and say, what was I good at remembering or what wasn't? Even if you make no effort to remember, again, you'll be better at it next time. So the next thing you can do is make connections between things. Your brain has got all these neurons that are connected to each other, and they literally, physically make connections to each other. They send out their little axons and join up. And so you need to force them to do that by making connections between ideas.
Yep, we'll talk a bit more about that in a second.
We will. But we'll talk a bit more about connecting to other ideas in the course, but you can explicitly try and connect them to everything else that you know. No, that theorem sort of reminds me of that thing they said in The Simpsons that time.
Yes. Or alternatively, that theory about the linear algebra reminds me of mango chicken. I can smell the mangoes now.
Okay, so it doesn't have, and you can literally connect it to anything random that you like. If it's just something that makes sense to you, it will help you remember. The more ways that there are to put it in terms of your senses, the more ways there are to get it out again later. And lastly, the spelling contract. I don't know if you ever had one of those when you were small at school, and you had your spelling words, you had to do your look, cover, write, check, but then you also had to do them all in different colours, or make a word find with your spelling words, or trace around the edges of them so that you knew the shape of the words, or draw them as pictures. That's what you can do to anything, not just spelling. Anything that you have to remember, you can explicitly do it in multiple different ways. Colour it in, connect it with pictures, all of those things, so that you are using the idea in multiple different formats so it's easier to get it out again later. So that's our advice for remembering. And remembering is only the first step of understanding.
All right, so like I said before, one of the things I would do is summarise my notes and organise the ideas. So, lists. I was a big fan of lists. I like lists because what I'd do to remember is I'd go, there are 5 things on my list. And if I didn't write down 5 things, I knew I'd missed one of them. And sometimes when I've written them down, I go, I have 5 things, but one of them is wrong, so I'm still missing one. So having a list and just knowing the number of items on that list was enough to tell me whether I'd done everything that I needed to, or a bit of a prompt to think a little bit harder about what it might be that I'm missing.
That's particularly useful for procedures that are supposed to get from one place to another. If you have a list of things you're supposed to do, you can check them off. Mind maps are great. A mind map is a tool used to organise ideas. Basically, you start with a topic in the middle and you draw a circle or around it, and then you just draw arrows going to all sorts of other things that they might be connected to. And you're literally drawing the connections between things, which is what this point of connections is. I don't think it's true anymore. The old seminar on the Maths Learning Centre's website about subspaces in Maths 1A was organised around a mind map originally, because that's how I wrote it. And if you get the chance to do to make cheat sheets, there's a seminar on the website, and it is literally a mind map, and I just zoom into different bits of it. So mind maps are very useful for some people. Some people just don't understand them at all. So if it doesn't help you, then don't do it.
And that's the key with a lot of the advice we're giving. We're giving you a lot of advice. Not all of it will apply to you. You have to pick what works for you. And at the end of the exam, we're going to tell you, take a note of what worked for you, what didn't work for you.
So final thing, we do want to make things about connections. Definitions are usually chosen in maths to match up with a certain way of doing things. So in Mathematics 1A, the definition of linearly independent is chosen specifically so that it can be done by row operations. Okay, it can be checked with row operations. There are other definitions, but the one that's been chosen there has been chosen because it matches with row operations. And making the connection between that definition and row operations is a really useful thing to do. And connections, for example, in Maths 1M, where you're doing complex numbers have multiple representations, and connect the different ideas and the different representations to each other. What does multiplication look like in this representation? What does it look like in this representation? What does it look like in this representation? Connecting things together like that is a really useful way of understanding mathematical ideas, or any ideas, and it will help you remember them better too.
Yes, and part of that idea is some things are better for, like, we're actually asking you, what is this good for and what is it not good for? You know, when would I take linear equations and do a substitution, rearrange, do a substitution? When would I shove it into a matrix and do my row operations? Is there one situation that is better suited than the other? So key part about this, and pretty much every time we talk to one of the first year maths lecturers, is they go, oh, I wouldn't teach it in this order myself, but we have to teach it this way to keep consistent. So the order it's taught in is not always the order that makes most sense once you know all the ideas.
Yeah. So when you come to studying it, so I've seen people who write cheat sheets who label their cheat sheet by what lecture that stuff was in. Nobody cares what lecture it was in, okay? You should organise your information thematically by what it was about. Okay, so complex numbers are much better understood by lining up the three different representations. Even though you didn't meet polar form until the end, organise it so that they're all there together. So don't organise things based on the time that you saw them in, organise them by how they're related to each other.
And specifically, like polar form in complex numbers works really well with trigonometric formula.
Yeah.
Put that connection in.
So you'll find that when you see our revision seminars on the website, they're not organised in the order they were taught. Sometimes you must teach things in a certain order because they have to build on certain things, but remembering them is in a different order. So we've said a lot of these things already. When you study, you should constantly be asking yourself questions, and those questions are related to how you're going to show your understanding and how you're going to be good at doing that and how you're going to solve problems. So when you're in a particular thing, so why is this here? So why is this bit of the course in this location relative to the other bits of the course? You know, why have we learned about polynomials before we did complex numbers? Okay, and why have we learned about row operations before we did this? That's a useful thing to ask yourself. And also, why is this theorem here? Oh, it's here because the next theorem is really more important, and we've only done this one to lead up to that one.
Yeah. And that's that's also embedded in the how are things connected. All right.
We talked about that at length.
Yes, we're going to keep going. What would happen if? So one of the things that we want you to do, you should be aware that the lecturer has put a fair bit of effort into finding a question which you will have not seen the likes of before. All right. The person who every year people come out and go, oh, they did this thing they've never done before, and I'm like, yes, that is one of the challenges of writing an exam, to come up with the question that the students haven't seen before. Expect to see a question you have not seen before. So how you preempt that is go, well, what if I did this? All right, and ask yourself that question. Try and think through what information you have about it, and actually see what you can say for yourself without having to be asked the question in the exam.
Oh, this integral's got a minus there. What would I do if it was a plus?
Yeah.
You know, what would I do if this was a sine instead of a cos? Okay, what would I do if this was in polar form? Okay, they're really good questions to ask yourself. And then finally, how do I use this? Most of the stuff that you see is used somewhere else in the course. And so it's good to ask yourself that question. So that's understanding. The next thing is you need to practice solving problems. Okay, that just goes without saying. And that, you know, we've got some points to make about that. So the first thing you should note is that you've been practicing solving problems all through the semester. You've had all these assignments. You have Mabel TA assignments, you have written assignments. Okay, but your Mabel TA assignments are completely crap for helping you study for exams, because you won't have Mabel TA in your exam, and you won't have a computer that is handily connected to the internet while you're doing your exam. So you need to practice doing problems in the exam setting. Okay, and we have a phrase there: practice makes permanent. Okay, practice does not make perfect. If you practice something not perfect, you will learn to do it not perfect. Okay? Whatever you practice is what you will do under stress, and exams are stressful situations. Okay? So my classic example is this one. I did first aid training and we learned how to use an EpiPen. You know, one of those things that's got adrenaline in it, so if someone's having an anaphylactic shock to peanuts, you ram the EpiPen in their leg. Okay, and they teach you, you practice on the person next to you rather than on yourself, because what used to happen is they taught you to practice on yourself, and all these people in this stressful situation, someone's dying in front of them, will ram the EpiPen into their own leg. Okay, that's just the way human brains work. You must practice whatever it is that you want to do in the future. Do not think, oh, I'll do it fine in the exam. You won't. You'll do whatever you practiced.
Yep. No, just like a friend who completed his PhD, job in a bank, anytime he had a difficult problem, he'd turn to the PhD student next to him and go, Aiden, how do I do this? And Aiden would basically type into Google and go, that's how you do it. And there he is, sitting at his bank job, and apparently after 4 hours of trying to work something out, he sent Aiden a text message going, Aiden, how do I do this? And Aiden typed it into Google, and 5 minutes later, this is how you do it. Here's a link to the page. And that's that whole thing. He spent he actually spent 5 years practicing asking Aiden how to do difficult things. When it came to a job, the first thing he did
was want to ask Aiden. So what you need to do is you need to, if at all possible, when you're practicing questions in exam conditions, have a quiet place. Don't have your phone or your email or Facebook or Twitter or whatever other crap that you look at all the time. Set yourself a time limit, because you need to practice doing things in a time limit. Don't have your notes and solutions with you. You cannot look at your notes and solutions in the exam. So put yourself in a place where you can't, so that you can practice doing it without. And also do proper written answers. You know, you'll say, oh no, it's okay, I'll write it nicely when I get there. You won't. Practice writing neatly, quickly. Okay? We had a lovely student who would be in the Maths Learning Centre every day writing his maths assignments on Word with equation editor. Okay? And then when he got to exams, he said, my hand hurts so much, I can't write that quickly. He said, well, you should do your assignments with your own hand. Like, practice writing maths with your own hand. You've only ever written maths on a computer. How the hell do you think you're going to do an exam? So anyway, but you don't want to be the person that we tell the story about next time, okay? You want to be the person who we tell the story and said, yes, and this person took our advice and then they got like 99% in their exam. That's the story we want to tell.
Yes, we do want to tell that story a few more times.
I'm going to ask yourself some questions when you practice your exams. What understanding am I showing? How do I tell if I'm right? That's a really important question to ask yourself. Because, you know, Maple TA, it's great for teaching you how to ask a computer to tell if you're right. How do I tell if I'm right? Well, I press how did I do, and it tells me what I did. But in an exam, there's no how do I do button.
So one of the key parts about this is a lot of the information you've been given in lectures is how you can check for yourself that you have the right answer. So that rather than pressing the how did I do, you can go, like some students like, how did you know that was wrong? And I'm like, well, there's a thing called the remainder theorem. I have worked it out in my head and I've gone, wrong number, not going to be right.
Yeah.
And so and that knowing how to check for yourself is part of the understanding the course. If you do something like that in the exam and you say, hey, I did this and I found that I got the wrong answer, you may find that even though you have the wrong answer, that's worth 1 mark for going, I know that I've got it wrong. I've demonstrated understanding of the material and I can get a mark for that.
Yeah. The next question is there a better way? I mean, often in an exam, the way that you thought of is the way that you do, because there's just not enough time. But while you're preparing for an exam, after you've done it in your time limit, you go back and say, was there like a quicker way of doing that? Or was there a better way that made it more obvious to the person reading it that I knew what I was talking about?
And this is where those connections, all that information, all those theorems, definitions, they're telling you, you can use this to shortcut this process. All right? A lot of the things where people go, I have to reduce this matrix, you go, no. You can just ask what the determinant of it. If the determinant's 0, you know those vectors are linearly dependent. You already asked if they're linearly dependent. You didn't want more than that. You can set up a nice square matrix, do the determinant, answer the questions more quickly.
Next question, does this tell me more about how to solve problems? So don't just look at your question and go, have I solved it or not? Say, is there anything I can learn here about facing problems that I don't know how to solve in the future? Okay, so don't just ask yourself, what maths did I do? Ask yourself, what thinking did I do? When I faced that problem, the thing that made me think of the answer, was underlining this word and looking up what it meant, and not looking, remembering what it meant. Okay? So, and that sounds wishy-washy, but it really does help to give yourself problem-solving strategies that you can use if you don't know what to do.
There's also, does it change the way I understand? Does it change how the first thing I think to do? All right. When you do something, sometimes you go, oh, the first thing I think to do in this situation is this. Like when people say, oh, how do I prove something? I go, is it linear algebra? And if it is, the first thing you do is write down the definition. So,
yep.
So that's part of the basic change my understanding. Once I'd done it a few times, where I was asked to show or prove something in linear algebra, and I'd written down the definition, and then my next piece of advice is write down the next theorem in the notes. And a few times, that was all I had to do.
That was the entirety of the solution, because it all lined up and that was the answer.
Yeah. And so that changed my thinking. It said to me, oh, I'm not going to think about the clever trick that's needed for this thing. I'm going to start with those points, and hopefully I don't need to do any more than that.
So I just want to say, we forgot to mention it earlier, if you don't have access to past exams, so for example Mathematics 1M, which is curriculum change this year, and you just have one practice exam, a great thing you can do is go through all the old tutes and pick one question from each tutorial and treat that as an exam. Okay? And that will give you, I don't know, 4 or 5 practice exams to do.
Or questions at the back of the textbook.
Yep.
So I haven't actually looked at Adrian's notes this time around, but typically he's been very good at saying comes from this chapter of this textbook or this section of this chapter.
I believe he's actually put in 1M extra questions that you can do.
Yeah, so you can actually go through and look up the textbook to go through those ones. All right, that's sort of the next step after you've gone through the tutorial questions.
One thing I want to say about the tutorials is that some tutorial questions are specifically designed to help you learn something. Okay, so when you get to the end of one of these, you go, of course, the dot product is obviously related to whether they're at right angles. Why did I not see this before? Okay,
Yep.
That's what you want to look for when you see tute questions, because sometimes that's the exact purpose that they have.
And sometimes they're actually telling you, they're actually adding course content.
Yeah.
It's not just that you are supposed to understand something, they're actually part of what you're going to be examined on.
There's a classic in the Maths 1B tutorials where they define perp, vector spaces. And so in one tute they define this concept, and then the next tute they say, remember tutorial 3, and then you use it again. They remember tutorial 3, and they use it again. And it's actually part of the course content. It's not taught in the lectures at all. So that's also useful stuff to look out for.
Yeah, so be aware that some of the course stuff that you could be examined on is in the tutorials. You should have reviewed the tutorials for things you might need.
Like the integral of sec in Maths 1A. Yeah, look out for that. Okay, so the last step is to get some help. Okay, so you've tried to remember, you've done a lot of problem solving, and along the way you'll actually get to things you're going, look, I need someone to help me get over the hump with this. I can't understand this on my own today. So I'm going to get some help, and the first step to getting help is to know who and when. So we have a whole seminar, which you can look up on our website, about who to get help from. But this is the short version.
The really short version.
First person is you. And we've already talked in the last 2 steps about how to help yourself. But one other thing you can do for helping yourself is leave it for 2 hours and come back to it later, and you might find that you'll be better off and understand it then.
There is a lot to be said for going, hey, I've had difficulties with this problem. I'm going to study a different subject for a while, and then it might actually come to you by studying a different subject, because your subconscious will still work on it, because brains just do that.
Or go to bed.
Go to bed.
Sleeping is really good for helping you learn.
There is an economy, there is a balance between the amount of sleeping and the amount of studying you should do. You should watch for that.
Yes, your brain, in order for your brain to, in its dreams, sort out your problems, you need to have problems to sort out. Yep. So you have to do some study when you're awake. Your friends are the next step. Be wary of your friends sometimes.
Your friends sometimes say things like, Nick, there's this cool online game. We should play that. And 14 hours later you go, really? It's midnight? When did that happen?
Yes. Or yeah, why don't you come out for lunch? It's like, okay. And 5 hours later. Okay, so friends are like that. But friends can also motivate you if you tell them that's what you want. And they can also, when you say, oh, I really couldn't do this problem, they'll say, oh, well, just a second, look at this word. There's the thing. And they go, oh, of course.
That thing. Oh.
So your course should have consulting times specifically for it. So your lecturer, there will be tutors from your course which will be available at certain times before the exam. Some of those will be doing their consulting time in the Maths Learning Centre, some of them will be elsewhere, and your lecturer should have times that they're available in their own office, and you should make use of those because they've put them on to help you, and you should use them.
Yes, in fact, lots of lecturers really treat it as a very good sign that you've come and asked them questions. There was only one person who came and asked me questions during the semester, before the exam, that I thought, oh dear, that person's going to fail. And that's because they hadn't been to any of the classes. But if you've been to classes, you've tried the tutorials, tried the exercises, and you have questions for the lecturer, then you will probably pass. All right? The mere process that you've gone to, spent that much time working on the material, to know that there are questions you could ask, means that you are probably going to pass.
Excellent questions to ask the lecturer are, is this the sort of thing you might ask in an exam? Okay, they will usually be a bit evasive about that question, but lecturers cannot help giving you tidbits, little secret messages about the exam because they did write it and they can't help but know what they're looking for. We did not write the exam, so we can't tell you that information. Okay?
You can ask us all you like, but I actually go to a fair bit of effort to make sure I don't find out what's in the exam, because I'm terrible at giving away hints of what's in the exam. If I did know, but I don't.
So we can't tell you that sort of thing, but they can. I mean, you can't just say what's in the exam, because they'll say, I can't tell you that. You ask them specific questions about other things. You say, well, this sort of level of 3-page working for this integral, is that the sort of thing we're expecting in an exam? And they'll go, well, no, I probably wouldn't come up like that. Okay, and then finally there's always the Maths Drop-In Centre. So Maths Learning Centre drop-in, 10 a.m, 4 p.m. weekdays, just drop in. And the other good thing about that is you might find other people there who are studying who've already solved some of those problems.
And so like David said at the very start, find someone. If there's no one from your course on the table, get the little sign on the table, write the course you are studying for so that other people can find you.
Yep.
Right? Because we will be busy. And we want you to come. And if you can't sit in the drop-in centre, sit next to the drop-in centre and give us a wave.
Usually as the exam approaches, we commandeer tables outside the drop-in centre as well, and we'll come out and look to see what people are doing as well. So just keep that in mind, and feel free to run in and get someone's attention, and we'll make you next.
Do that thing where you go, oh hey, we're sitting at that table over there, can you come and talk to us next, sort of thing. And we will do that.
So when you do ask questions, be prepared and be specific.
Yes. So lecturers are going to like it a lot more if you know that if you don't just go in, oh, I thought I might have a question about this course, let me just look, that will frustrate them. If you go, oh, I didn't really understand anything that followed the words linear algebra, then they will be a bit annoyed. But if you come in and go, oh, I don't know how the determinant relates to finding out if vectors are linearly independent, then they will tell you something.
And they'll often tell you things that you need to know, but you didn't ask.
Yeah. And that also gives them the thing that they might actually focus on, the thing that you need to know for the exam. All right, that gives them the opportunity to go, oh yes, well there are all these things, but you would specifically want to focus on this one, which might be construed as a hint.
Yes. So yeah, do be prepared. Lecturers in particular don't like it if you say something like, would they say, so what's your problem? So like everything? They won't like that. So even if everything is the problem, pick one thing and ask them that.
Have a list of 3 maybe.
And then ask another one. And Maths Learning Centre, if you say everything, go, sure, and then we'll say, could we narrow it down a bit, and we'll help you do that. But lecturers will often not ask the could we narrow it down question because they're not good at that. Lots of them are, but many of them aren't. And then finally, ask early, ask often. So okay, you've spent a bit of time practicing, right? Once you've got problems that you're pretty sure you can't solve on your own, ask straight away if you can.
Yep. I had a nice lady who walked into my drop-in centre and said, so I'm doing StatPrac 1, but I haven't been to anything so far this semester. And I'm like, well, it's 10 days to your exam, you're probably going to fail. And she's like, okay, thank you for your honesty. I'm like, so if you want to try and pass, these are the things I suggest you do. And so each day she'd come in, she will have done the things I asked her to do the day before and ask me relevant questions about it. And we'll go through and give her next lot of stuff to do and end up getting credit for the subject, which disturbs me greatly. But
that's more about the subject than the person, probably. So if you are doing Stat Prac 1, that gives you good of hope, lots of hope, right?
Yeah. So start early. Don't be the one who leaves it till 10 days out.
Yeah. Oh, and also, if you have not watched some of or all of the lectures, like if you haven't been to many of the lectures and you haven't watched them yet, start now. Okay? As much as Netflix says that you should be able to watch, until your eyes are square, it doesn't work for studying. So make sure you can't binge on Maths 1A. Okay, it just doesn't work. Okay, so what you need to do is space out your watching so that you don't get overloaded.
And you should have pretty much watched all of them by now.
Now, yeah. Okay. So that's our advice about studying. And the rest of it will go a bit quicker because we're now with that studying. We're now getting close to the exam. So here's just some general good advice. First, be organised.
Plan your time. I used to be quite uptight about planning my time, and I'd have a little schedule. We said I'd work for an hour and a half. I'd have 10 minutes off. I'd work for an hour and a half. I'd have half an hour off. I'd work for an hour and a half, so on and so forth. I had half an hour in my timetable which said, call your girlfriend. And so at that point in time, I would get up, I would sit by the phone, I would call my girlfriend. And I would actually have everything planned in. I would have 14 hours a day planned, and there would be 10 hours a day which would label relax and sleep. So I literally had all 24 hours of the day planned for something. All right, I didn't necessarily stick rigidly to my plan, but I did have a plan, and I did usually end up doing 14 hours a day work.
I wasn't quite that stringent, but
that's because you could actually do exams.
Well, we'll get to that. And set up your study space. Like when I was in first year, I lived with my sister. That was an interesting experience. So I made a place where I could study, and so when the exams approached, I cleaned my desk so that I knew what I had, pretty much. Nicholas, for those listening online, Nicholas is making an action of sweeping things off the desk onto the floor. I set it up so that everything was there. I made sure I had a nice collection of pencils and a calculator and spare batteries and everything so that I didn't have to leave the room in order to collect anything that ran out. Because if I did, you could be guaranteed I would meet someone outside there who would distract me for a good hour. So I needed to stay in my room while I was studying and not leave to get things.
This goes back to our earlier, know who's good for your study, know who's not. So I used to go live with my grandmother, and so I would walk out and go, chatting. And after 5 minutes she goes, you're taking up my spare room because you're here to study. How about you go back and study? And going, all right.
Yeah, but if you don't have a space of your own, talk to the people you live with and say, I commandeer this space, it is mine until the end of the exams. You okay with that? And they'll say no, and you'll say, stuff you, and I'll do it anyway.
Yep.
Or be very polite and give them cake instead. That might be better.
If you live with your parents, explain to them quite politely that 2 weeks out from exams is not the time when you are going to go around and run your little brother around to his baseball or basketball or netball or whatever it is he plays. All right? Make sure they understand that for the time up to the exam, for the 2 weeks prior to the exam, the thing you are focused on is exams. Do the 14 hours of study a day. Have a little timetable where you go, see, there is no space for running my little brother around, and or sister.
So be healthy as much as possible. Eat properly. In fact, you should put eating into your timetable.
Yes.
Or you might forget. Or you might do more of it than you expect.
Chocolate is not an appropriate diet for the exam revision period. All right?
But, however, a little bit of chocolate every day will probably be good for you.
Yeah. Dark chocolate. Yes, dark chocolate. We are not suggesting you avoid sweets or bad food. However, foods that are high in fat are not good for your brain. They slow your brain down. They make you sleepy. You should sleep properly. You should actually, I'm an uptight sort of person, and so I would find it very difficult to sleep, and so literally half an hour before I'd go to bed, I'd go through my relaxation process. And so I would be relaxed, and then I would sleep. And part of being that was exercising. I would exercise. I would do half an hour of exercise because you're working your brain fairly hard, all right? But what that does is it builds up something in your body which makes you kind of a little bit toey. And so it makes it difficult to sleep. So you need to do exercise so you burn that stuff as well, all right?
Yeah, and even if it's just 5 minutes, like between things, you can go, I'm just going to go for a walk. See you guys, back in 10 minutes.
Do your Pooh Bears. Do your Pooh Bear squats and stuff.
Pooh Bear squats. Yeah.
Pooh Bear does stoutness exercises.
That's right. But That could just be relaxing as well. You want to mix it in, but having time where you deliberately choose to watch something crappy on telly because you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, so that was the other thing, that if you look closely on my timetable, there was half an hour for watching something like Scooby-Doo. So, because I was a lot happier person after I'd watched Scooby-Doo.
I used to have an intense desire during exams to watch Star Trek. That was the only time I ever had a desire to watch Star Trek. It didn't appeal to me at all, other than during exams.
Because it was extremely useful for Stat Prac 1 in the old days.
Yes, yeah, the old Stat Prac 1 lecturer had a lot of Star Trek-based examples.
Let's keep moving.
Anyway, and finally, be realistic. Okay, we've already mentioned let some other things go. You may have to say, I'm sorry, I cannot play insert sport here this week. Okay.
So, for example,
or you might say, actually, that's going to be much needed time out from my study, but you might need to let some of the training schedule go.
Yeah. So I would play lacrosse, and I would tell the coach I would come out and play the games, but for at least the 2 weeks prior, I would not turn up to training, because training took like 4 hours out of the day each night, and that was 8 hours of study that I needed each week. But the game, you go, you play, you go home, and you do something. And after play, and particularly with lacrosse, you get to hit people. And as I mentioned, I was a little bit toey around exam period.
So be realistic, start early. You've got 4 or so courses, which most of which will have exams, and you've got to fit it all in somehow, so start as early as you can. Do short bursts of study. Most people say that 50 minutes is about your limit before you need to take a break of some sort, even if it's just to get up, walk around the house and come back again.
I'm going to say this, like you noticed when I was talking about it, I said I'd pencil in an hour and a half, all right? But that was usually breaking into 40 minutes and then 40 minutes. So that I could actually, 40 minutes, after 40 minutes I'd get up and I would touch my toes or whatever it was, and then go on and do the next bit.
Yep, so don't try and study for 6 hours straight. Plan to take short breaks in the middle.
With the exception of doing a practice exam.
Yes, practice exam, don't take break.
You should pencil in your practice exam for each subject just once. Sit down in a room where there is just a desk and just a chair and maybe a bottle of water, and actually do the exam in exam conditions in the 2 or 3 hours that you will get given, so that your body is used to sitting down and doing that once in a while.
Oh yeah, and also if your
at the same time of day.
If your statics exam is, for example, 2 days after your Maths 1A exam, don't try and do the whole of statics in those 2 days. Okay, study beforehand, before your other exam. Just as an example. Okay, so here we are on the day of the exam. Oh no, this is not quite the day of the exam, this is before the day of the exam. Have a plan for getting there. You should know when and where your exam is. Don't be the person who says on the discussion board the day after the exam, so when's the exam, people?
So how many people, with a bit of quick show of hands, how many people this will be their first university exams? Right, pretty much most of you. So you're going to find one of these wonderful things where you can catch the bus to Wavell Showgrounds, and it's like, oh, it's a pleasant 15-minute journey. On the day of the exams, there will be 5,000 other people trying to get there at the same time, and suddenly the bus that you were going to catch, which had like half a dozen people on it, will have like 50 people on it, and you'll have to wait for the next bus. It doesn't hurt to try and catch the bus, one bus earlier, or maybe 2 buses earlier, so that you are actually make sure you can get on a bus. The people at the bus station know about this, and they quite often remember to schedule extra buses, but sometimes they don't know when the exams start, so you need to be prepared.
Yep. You need to know what time it is, what day it is, what location it is, and as well as public transport getting there, you need to, if you're planning to drive instead, know how to get there, have a backup plan if there are roadworks, because there will be, and also plan where to park, because there are also many other people who are wanting to put their car near the exam venue. So plan enough time to get from wherever it is you end up parking to the exam venue.
Yes.
So that's all pretty good.
Don't ask us about time and location of your exam. We don't know.
Yeah, and we're not allowed to tell you. Staff are not allowed to tell students when their exams are, because then if we told you the wrong time, it would be our fault that you didn't come. So that's just good to know. So we make a point of knowing roughly when they are, so we can plan the time, staff numbers in the Maths Learning Centre, but we're not allowed to know. So on the day, leave time for getting ready. Okay, don't just leave time for getting there, leave time to get ready. You must eat before your exam. It's a long time between when you leave and when you come back and when you can next eat. So if it's a morning exam, have breakfast. If it's an afternoon exam, have lunch, but possibly a lunch that's more the size of a breakfast rather than having a nice big meal and feeling all sleepy in the afternoon. And then you need to collect what you need. Whoop, let me go in and zoom on that. All right. So, pens and pencils, bring more than one.
Calculator, if you're allowed one. And remember, a spare set of batteries for your calculator is never a bad plan. Batteries go flat.
Casio calculators are notorious for giving wrong answers when their batteries are running low. But do check what kind of calculator you're allowed, because if it's the wrong kind, they will take it off you. Okay, so check what kind of calculator you're allowed to have. Yep. We don't know all the rules. You're going to have to talk to the people in your course for that. If you are allowed to take notes with you, take notes with you. If you're not, don't.
Clothing for the exam hall climate. One of the things that is a mystery to the many of us in the world in large is that when the weather is cold, the exam hall is colder than outside somehow. When the weather is hot, the exam hall is hotter than outside. So be prepared for the appropriate climate. All right.
This semester, being winter, it will be very cold in the exam hall. Dress appropriately.
I personally recommend a beanie.
Yeah. That's only, yeah, well, anyway. Bring a clock or a watch to keep time. There will be a clock, but it may be a very long way away. Bring some water. I think you're supposed to have it in a clear container so that they can tell you haven't got notes hidden inside it.
Again, this is your responsibility to check this information. It is very important that you bring some snacks. I personally recommend things like barley sugars or like lolly snakes. Those sort of clear jelly lollies are actually some of the best things to have because A, they have no fat, and B, they're almost pure sugar, and your brain works better on pure sugar. There is only one thing in the body that works better on pure sugar, and that is your brain. You're being asked to use your brain in the exam, feed it what it wants. That is the only time I recommend you eat lollies rather than proper food. Bananas, I'd go bananas and apples, but
banana you want to eat like before the exam so it has time to get the potassium to where it needs to go. And finally, you should bring with you a positive attitude. There is nothing like thinking you're going to fail your exam to make you fail your exam.
Right. Be positive, walk in there. Even if you're like this girl who started 10 days out and had some blonker in the Maths Learning Centre go, you know, you're probably going to fail. Be positive. Go, yep, I'm going to show that dude he was wrong. And
she did. So here we are at the exam. There are 4 time zones at the exam. There is waiting for the exam to start, like before you're even in the exam hall. So turn off your phone.
Yes.
Because you have to do it at some point.
Some people will actually consider it academic misconduct if you do something silly like answer your phone during the exam, because that's talking to people. All right. So to resist the urge of answering the phone when it rings, because I've seen people do it. They've had their phone in their pocket and they've gone, oh, a phone ring. And just like going, hey, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Okay?
So turn it off. Don't cram. Do not try and put more information in your head. It will just push something else out the other side.
And cause you stress.
And stay away from other people who are cramming.
Or people who are just stressed.
You know, nothing worse than the person who said, oh, did you do that exam question? It's like, no, I didn't.
Do you know how to find an orthonormal basis? What's one of them?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Stay away from those people and actively try to calm down. Okay, taking a few deep breaths, closing your eyes is a good plan. So then you're in. Okay, you've found the seat that you're supposed to be in, and you've made sure that you're sitting in the right exam. You're not in the wrong row of the exam hall. That's an important thing to check. And here we are, and they've given you 10 minutes before the exam officially starts to read the exam paper. You're not allowed to write on the exam paper itself. That's called reading time. During that time, here's our advice: read the whole exam.
I know, novel approach, eh? But we actually want you to, because how you answer Part D might determine how you should have answered Part A. Having read Part D first, you go, oh, that's right, I need to do this before I actually try and answer Part A. It will save you time. Write down your mental cheat sheet if you've sort of committed some things to memory which you are not good at remembering later on. You've done that, I'm going to remember this. First thing I do is get it right and write it down in the exam. So there are people who do that, that's their strategy.
They just repeat something over and over to themselves, because I'm going to forget this. And when I was in first year, it was some of my true gut entities saying, just write it down. Okay, done now. Okay, that's my cheat sheet. It's my mental cheat sheet. Okay, plan your time. Okay, so, ooh, that one's tricky, looks tricky. I'll give myself a bit more time for that one. I'll start here.
Yep. Sometimes one of the tricks I used to do was go, all right, the exam is out of 100 marks and I have 120 minutes. That's like 1 minute and 12 seconds for each mark. And so the question says 5 5 marks, that's 6 minutes worth of 6 minutes worth of time. Don't spend more than that. Don't be there. One of the great dudes we had came in and he's like, I failed. And I'm like, how on earth did you fail? And he's like, well, so I knew the algebra really well, so I did the algebra. I got 43 out of 50 for the algebra section. I'm like, so how did you fail? And he's like, well, I got 5 out of 50 for the calculus, because he'd spent 10 minutes on it. Don't spend all your exam doing one half of the exam and fail to get the easy marks on the other half, all right? Do the easy marks. Do we have a do the easy marks?
Well, find the things that you know how to do.
The easy marks.
I know how to do that, I know how to do that, I know how to do that. I'll do them first and then they're out of the way.
Yep.
And then, if you still have time, on your scribble paper, which they give you, you will start writing down definitions, because definitions are what you need to do any proof or any other question at all, because that's what mathematicians are interested in. So write down definitions.
Yes. And basically, once you're in the exam, you actually start to need to know what works for you. This is sort of general advice, and it is good advice, but it may not be the best advice for you.
So
right?
I would recommend, when you do practice exams, practice having reading time. Right, writing time, which is the majority of the time that you have. So when you come to a question, read the whole question, because it may be, as Nicholas said, that because you have to find these 6 things in here, the best way would be to do part A in a certain way. If you did it via row operations or whatever, you'd be able to get all that information rather than doing it by some other method. Write something for every question. Do not leave any space blank. You write something in every space, okay, because you have a chance of getting a mark.
Use the rest for inspiration. I did a horrifying exam in second year physics where I was supposed to write down Maxwell's law of wave equations of electromagnetism, and frankly I knew they were going to be there and I just forgot them. I couldn't remember them when I got into the exam. You asked me 5 minutes before the exam, I could remember them. Asked me 5 minutes after the exam, I could remember them. In the exam I couldn't remember them. So what I did is I used the rest, because the entire exam was about these things, I spent the entire exam combing through for any little hint about what might be there. And I ended up getting 3 out of 4 of them. It was horrifying. It was a very bad exam.
But sometimes other bits of the exam will talk about things that will be useful, not directly, but will give you hints at the rest. And then, if you don't know what to do, just start writing. Write down the definition.
Yep.
Never a bad plan.
Never
okay?
a bad.
If you just start writing, and don't spend all your time planning and never get to writing anything.
Yep.
It's why it's so good to practice exams, because what you want to do is practice writing in such a way so that the things that you would write to figure out what to do end up being part of your solution anyway.
Yep. And that's the thing. All the time I tell people, no, you actually want to get used to writing that out full. If there's something you did to check an answer, write that down. I am checking the answer by doing. All right?
Yep.
Little note that says I'm checking the answer by doing this means that the person marking your exam is going to go, why would you do that? You've already got the answer. But if you're saying, I'm checking my answer, they go, oh, hey, that's a good plan.
Yeah, and actually telling the reader what you're doing, saying, I'm doing this step, I'm setting up the equation, I'm solving the equation, subbing it into check. If you tell them what you're doing, then at least you'll know when you look back that you did everything as well.
Or alternatively, in my case, I've forgotten the formula for this, so I'm going to try and derive it this way. Think this is right. Let's plug in the numbers. Ooh, that can't be right.
Couldn't do part A. I assume the answer is 3, and now this is my answer for part B.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff in my exams which was not worth reading.
And then if you have any extra time, I never had extra time in exams. I always went right up to the last second. Down to my topology analysis exam in 3rd year, there's one question I couldn't do. I kept checking everything else, and I came back to it and I couldn't do it. And then in the last 5 minutes, I went, of course! And I got 100% on that exam. So, awesome. So, never leave early. There's always something else that you could make better. Check all your work. Ask yourself, have I answered the question? It's really important, because there's nothing worse than doing a lot of work and not actually answering the question. Is my working right, using all those things that we did earlier? And have I shown my understanding?
Yep, that's the key part. Have I shown that I understand? I was going to say, David is almost the opposite of me, because I would sit there and I'd go, oh, and I keep writing, and then when I walk out, I go, that was it. Damn. So, David 5 minutes before the end, me 5 minutes after the end.
So,
keywords.
Keywords to help you understand what the questions are asking you to do. We'll take them in turn, hey Nicholas. Verify means sub in to check. Okay, it does not mean solve the equation the long way. It means sub the answer into the original and see if it works.
State/write down. Just write it down. No working needed. So this is something you can just go, hey, this is the answer. I can see it. And it should be obvious.
Solve, find, determine means find whatever the values are that are missing.
Express right in a particular way,
Often it doesn't actually require any working, you just have to write it a different way.
such as write in polar form.
Find, evaluate, calculate means do some sort of process to produce an answer.
All right, show, use logical steps. So this means start somewhere, use logical steps, end up where they want you to end up.
So prove is the same as show, except you must use the definition, basically. Okay, so show means you could use a theorem, prove means you must use the definition.
In a similar way, hence means you must use, so if I'm asked to do something, hence this, then you must use the bit that they're suggesting.
Formulate means change the problem into equations but don't solve it yet.
All
so
right.
for example, formulate this problem as a linear optimization problem.
Watch for that one, because a lot of people will go and try and solve it when the answer is formulate, and somewhere in bold, trying to take up a good portion of the page but not too much so you've run out of room to answer, is the words do not solve.
Yeah.
All right, watch for those.
Yep, so if the thing doesn't explicitly tell you to do the solving part, don't. It's a waste of time. And interpret, write a sentence about the meaning. Okay?
All good.
And remember your problem solving skills. Okay, you want to start and say, what do the words mean? What's the goal? What information do I have already? Is there any other problems that I remember that are similar that could give me some inspiration? Remember those skills because you're going to need them. There will be at least one problem that you've never seen the like of before. All right, we're pushing down to the line. Here is some advice on checking your own work. We'll do it in turn 8. Read it aloud in your head. Don't read it actually aloud. That's bad. They'll assume you're trying to give information to others. But actually go through the process of saying it aloud in your head because you'll find missing words and missing numbers.
Yep. Check the original question, as in check the original question and make sure that firstly you've copied the numbers correctly. One of the things I do most of in the drop-in centre when someone says this is wrong is I check that they've copied the numbers correctly, including minus signs.
Oh yeah, and watch the minus signs. Everyone knows that minus signs are the things that cause the most problems in maths. So focus explicitly on whether minus signs have disappeared or appeared with no good reason.
Get yourself a packet of Tic Tacs, because if you put a Tic Tac on the page it looks like a fat minus sign. All right? And so you put a couple of those out, and at the end of each question you eat a Tic Tac and look for minus signs.
Yeah. Think about what the answer ought to look like. If they've said find and the answer's supposed to be a number, check that your answer is a number. And in sort of things that are supposed to be related to physics or whatever, think, is it reasonable that this is in the realm of 200 kilograms or should it more be like 20?
Yeah, actually that's one of the things the physics lecturer was bemoaning. Anyway, strategies are specific to topics. Some topics have specific strategies that you should be using. Have you used those specific strategies in the situation?
For example, differentiating it to check if your integral works. Okay, correcting errors in your exam. If you find an error when you're checking your question, put a note to say why it's wrong before you do anything else. To say, this is wrong because my derivative doesn't match what I started with, or this is wrong because when I subbed it back into the original it didn't work.
Yep. Don't cross it out until you have something to replace it. So some of the maths lecturers treat it as a bad sign if you have two answers to the same question. You're better off having two answers to the same question where one of them is right than having no answer to a question. All right?
And some people are instructed when they're marking to not mark anything that's crossed out.
Yep.
Okay, so don't cross it out. Put a note to say this is wrong and I know it's wrong. Here is my attempt at a second solution. And then once the second solution's there and you think it's right, then you can cross out the first one.
When you cross out something, a single line. Indicate with a box.
Draw a box around it and then...
Single line. Because some lecturers will allow the people marking the exam to mark stuff that is crossed out. If I can read it and I can go, hey, that was the right answer, I can give you marks for it even though you think it's wrong.
Or if you cross it out with great gusto, they won't be able to mark any of it.
Yes, if I can't read it, I can't mark it, therefore you can't get marks for it.
And do be aware, if necessary, sometimes you just have to start again.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know how many times I've started again with questions. All I know is that quite often I came up with the wrong answer still.
Yes. So I would always do all my checking as I went. I would never move on to another question until I'd checked that one. Whereas other people wait till the end of the exam. But I have trouble doing that.
All right, we're actually over time, so
Now,
after the exam.
After the exam, some things to do. Reward yourself.
Have some chocolate.
Have some chocolate or whatever.
Yeah.
Don't worry. There is nothing you can do about your exam mark now. So stop worrying about it. The only thing that's making it a problem now is you worrying about it. So stop worrying.
Rest, relax, prepare for the next one if you have to. If you have another one, don't party too hard. If it is your last exam, hey, I don't care how hard you party.
Yeah, my sister had her last exam on the day before my first exam and threw a huge party in my house that night. I moved back with my parents after that.
Yeah, your sister's a performer, isn't she?
Oh yes, she's a director. But
Don't live with performers is the other moral to this story.
Yeah, if you live with people who are doing the exam at the same time, basically, and much later. So after you finished all your exams, but before you go properly on holidays, ask yourself how you could have done better. Think about how you studied and said, that didn't work.
Yep.
That thing that I did in the exam, that was crap. But this was good. I'll do that next time.
Yep.
Really important to do that. And that's pretty much the entirety of our talk. Thank you very much.
Come and talk to us if you're having difficulties with your maths.
Good luck with your exams.
Yes. Good luck. Hope we. Yeah, thank you.